generous donations from listeners like you.
Welcome to the Men's 911 Show. Each week, mental health host experts Sharon Jackson and Tara Evans share their wisdom on how to help men afflicted with female abuse. The mission is to support men who have suffered interpersonal abuse and assault of domestic violence. More than 830,000 men fall victim to domestic violence every year, which means every 37.8 seconds, somewhere in America, a man is battered. Tara and Sharon tell the untold stories of abused men to bring awareness to the changes that need to take place so that men of all ages can receive the support and services they need to reach their potential for a healthy and meaningful life. Tara and Sharon help guide you on your way to improve outcomes for this underserved population. Okay, audience, here is Men 911 with Sharon Jackson and Tara Evans.
Well, welcome everyone. Today, the Men's 911 Show is coming to you on Wednesdays at 3 p.m. on KWRH 92.9 FM and KXOK 102.9 FM, simulcasting and on the My Genre Network Monday to Friday at 9 a.m. and 4 p.m. Go to the usradionetwork.com. Today, Tara and I welcome our guest to the show. He has spent 35 years with the police department as a major case squad investigator. He also served on the Community Response Tactical Unit, executing search warrants for the DEA, FBI, and ICE. And he spent his last years at the St. Louis County Municipal Police Academy as an instructor, teaching new recruits and in-service officers constitutional law and Missouri statutory law. Audience, please welcome Officer Keith Emerson to the Men's 911 Show.
Welcome, Keith.
Thank you. Welcome. Thank you.
I'm so excited to have you on the show today. I've been trying to get you on here for a while, and today's your day. So one of the things we talk about on the Men's 911 Show is domestic violence against men. Can you speak to a time when you responded to a domestic violence call in which the male was the victim?
Yeah, and it happens more than people really think that it happens, but it's rarely that we actually get a call from the residents, from the men. Most times that I've had an interaction with men who were actually victims has been on site where I've been patrolling. One time I'm driving through an apartment complex and I hear a lot of noise. It's the middle of the night, probably like 2 or 3 in the morning. And I'm driving through and I hear this noise and I stop to try to find the source of the screaming and yelling. I see a guy running down the steps with kitchen appliances and pans and shoes being thrown after him. And I stop him and ask him what's going on. And he had just been involved in a physical altercation with his wife. And so I get her out of the apartment and we start to have a conversation. And she was very straightforward. She indicated that because she was angry with him, that she struck him several times and she was actually trying to hit him with the items that she was throwing down the stairs. So I arrested her because she was a primary aggressor, and that was one of many times. But most times we don't get those calls as a result of the actual man calling the police. Either the lady calls the police or neighbors call the police.
Wow. So as an officer, what were some of the challenges you faced when responding to domestic violence calls?
Well, domestic violence calls have a way of morphing into something usually a lot worse. And some of the dynamics that come to play is it starts off as a domestic call, but just getting to the scene is hazardous because you don't know what weapons are employed. You don't know what type of avenues people are going to try to use to escape interacting with law enforcement. And that's the first part. But once you get there, the next critical part is getting inside or getting the people outside because they answer the door. You know, that's a threat in itself, where they come to the door with, because they know you're the police and they know that you're not really there to be friends. You're there to restore peace and are actually make an arrest. So people don't like to be deprived of their freedom. So you have to worry about those things. Now, once you get the parties out or you get inside the residence, you have the additional hazard of being assaulted by either one of the parties. You know, most times when men are the victims and you go to arrest the woman, the men become assaultive in nature. So you you have a lot going on, and there are the occasions when the women are victims that they don't want to see the man removed from the house because they rely on that man for either financial or support or taking care of the children. So there's a nexus between calling the police to stop the problem and actually having the police remove somebody from the house that causes a possibility of violence.
Yeah, so you mentioned the children. Where do they come into play with these calls when you see men as the victim, mom as the perpetrator, and then we have kids?
Children are good witnesses. I can't tell you how many times I've been on a scene where the woman is alleging that she was attacked and that the male subject was the primary aggressor. And children are very truthful. And they know when something's not right, and they know when people aren't telling the truth. And a lot of times, children are the witness of the case because, we can make arrests. This is one of the cases where we can actually make an arrest without visually seeing the crime occur. So we take all that information into account when we're trying to establish probable cause as to whether or not we will make an arrest, number one, because Missouri is not a mandated arrest state where somebody has to go to jail in a domestic violence situation. But a lot of times children are great witnesses.
Wow. And so my next question, you kind of answered that. Why are domestic violence cases considered to be one of the most deadly and volatile calls for officers?
For all the reasons I mentioned before.
Yeah.
You go into a household where, and a lot of times you go into a household where the man is the man of the house, and you tell him things that may be embarrassing to him. You sort of kind of eat into his dignity and his pride. And sometimes that can lead to a physical assault. But the most dangerous part is, like I said, outlined from the end, just the actual approach to the physical location is dangerous.
Yeah, and you said something about men being embarrassed when you come in and they've been victims. How do you address something like that to keep them from feeling, I guess, embarrassed? Or is there a way that when you respond that we could limit, their dignity being violated or the embarrassment happening, because there's all these police officers show up and he's got to explain how he's being abused by this woman. I'm just trying to limit, the embarrassment for him when you guys would show up to those calls. Is there a way to preserve his dignity?
Everything in law enforcement comes down to the way that you interact with people. And everybody talks about de-escalation skills, and I say you should have un-escalation skills, because de-escalation means that it's already escalated. Now you're trying to fight from a position of loss, where if you start off your interactions with everybody in a way that maintains dignity and respect, you rarely find yourself in that position where you're now being assaulted by, the victim or the suspect. And the way that you could really try to minimize some of the bad feelings that men have when they're actually the victim is to remind them that a victim is a victim.
Yeah.
And you have to remind them that this is not the way that your life should be going. And you have a right not to be treated poorly, be harassed, be assaulted, be held and told to stay in a residence, and not leave. That's confinement that's illegal. And once you start talking to men to explain the dynamics of assault, they sort of kind of get it a little bit more and don't have the air like, you're a dude, you're supposed to handle this, because that's part of the problem already. They believe that they shouldn't report these incidents. And as a result, people don't really know the full scope of how many men are really in relationships that are detrimental to them.
Exactly. And so you said something that was just amazing. The dynamics. I want you to speak to men today about what is considered to be an assault. If they are in an abusive relationship with the woman, what would be considered to be an assault? A violation of their personal space, a violation of, just the law of what a woman can actually do that is actually a crime, because that's the thing here. We it's a struggle trying to determine how women actually abuse. Most of it is psychological, right?
Correct.
But there is some physical abuse, and you talked about confinement. That's not physical, and it's
That's
not
right.
emotional. So if you can kind of talk about, what those dynamics are and what is considered to actually be something that they can be arrested for, then that would be great, because I don't think that men actually know. They don't. They know that they're supposed to be strong, and yeah, she's hit me. It didn't really hurt me, but it does hurt. It hurts their integrity, their dignity, they're embarrassed, their manhood. So I really want you to talk about what some of those crimes could be.
Well, back in 2000, the state of Missouri decided to change the laws and actually make an actual domestic abuse or domestic assault charges. Prior to that, you arrest the person for whichever degree of assault that they committed, and you just narrated in your report, that it was an intimate, somebody that,
Intimate partner.
Yeah, that satisfied the state statute on domestic, because domestic is not just boyfriend, girlfriend. It could be siblings. It could be anything inside of a household. So in 2017, they did a revision. Missouri did a revision on a multitude of their laws. And since I taught Missouri statutory law in the police academy, that was a big point in time when they changed a lot. They added an assault fourth degree, and they also added domestic assault fourth degree. And when you start talking about the elements that have to be there, it could be something as simple as saying something, as if I were to say, if you do that again, I'll slap you in your face. If you believe that that's possible, and you are right physically there, and just the threatened use of force is enough to be charged. Not just touching somebody, but if you take a swing at somebody, even if you miss, that still constitutes one or more different degrees of domestic assault. Telling you that you're not leaving this house, or restraining you from using phones or other modes of communication, or taking your keys from you, all those things fall under one or more of the degrees of domestic assault. So it's not as ambiguous as it was back in 2000. It's not as ambiguous as it was back in 2017, because when they added the fourth degree, that was a catch-all for all the things that didn't really mean a battery, an actual physical battery. It was for all the other things that might have been harassment, stalking, things of that nature. It included all those, so that law enforcement and the prosecutors would have a vehicle by which to charge people, because what they realize is that it almost always gets worse. And a lot of times somebody's behavior can be severely interrupted by incarceration or by criminal prosecution. And they found that to be an effective source of slowing things down and maybe stopping people, because now they realize, I can't do that. I can be arrested for that. And a lot of times, once an abuser, male or female, once they're interacting with the judicial system, a lot of times that slows things down, and it makes them reflect upon their behavior and their actions, because quite frankly, men and women don't always have a good grasp on what's illegal, and as far as contact, any contact that you find objectionable or that you're offended by, that can be an assault. And just pushing me in a hallway, that could be that. However, let's be realistic. The likelihood that a man's going to call the police to say she pushed me in the hallway is slim to none. But when you get that call from a third party, and you get there, police officers are trained to actually do an initial investigation, because the first part of a criminal investigation is finding if a crime occurred. If you get there and no crime has occurred and both parties say, no, nothing happened, then you're out of there. But if your initial investigation uncovers that there is a primary aggressor, then you have an obligation to make a little bit more of an investigation, if that answers the question.
No, that does
Okay.
answer the question. And so that leads to my next question, which is, how are police officers trained to respond to domestic violence calls?
Police officers are trained in the academy to understand the state statutes and all federal laws. They're trained to understand discretion, because in state Missouri, we don't have a mandated arrest for, if you can identify who the aggressor is, we don't have it's not mandatory to make arrests. Some states it's mandatory on a domestic assault charge or a call to make an arrest if you can identify who the primary aggressor is. Missouri is not one of those states. However, in Missouri, if you don't arrest somebody, then you need to generate a police report indicating why you did not arrest somebody. And if you go back there within 12 hours a second time where a non-arrest was occurred on the first one, that you have to make an arrest. Now, that goes back to find out who the primary aggressor is. They're taught to do an investigation. It's a criminal investigation. You need to do an investigation. You need to ask the questions that will lead you to understand and maybe get an idea of who has it. Just because a woman has a scratch on her face doesn't mean that, it was caused by the man as an offensive move. It could have been in defense. Same thing with women. Just because the man has an injury doesn't mean that he wasn't the primary aggressor. So the investigation has to be a little bit more detailed. Usually when you have people taking pictures and a lot of people using their phones now in the midst of an interaction, when you have physical evidence like that, it's pretty straightforward. You have a third party watching it, or you have the children who give you a firsthand account of, I don't know why she keeps hitting him. Or in most cases, believe it or not, women will tell you, yeah, I slapped him. And you sort of say, what? They say, yeah, I slapped him. Why'd you do that? Because he said something I didn't like, so I slapped him. It's like, that's an assault, right? Oh, it is? Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Sharon, did you have any questions?
Oh, yeah. No, not. Yeah, I was just concerned. Mostly my concern is the psychological abuse that women do, and men almost get, they don't even know themselves that they're abused. It's like a brainwashing, coercive control, manipulation, isolation. I think that's really difficult. I mean, it's something that needs to be parsed out and really looked at seriously when it comes to men. And I don't know that police have a lot of time to do that,
Well, it's not that we don't have the time. It's just that we are charged with the responsibility of having cases adjudicated properly based on probable cause and arrest and introducing them to the justice system. We're more poised for that. However, I can tell you, when I started 40 years ago, there was no sensitivity training. There was no, it was just, beat them up, take them to jail, And that's really what it was. You didn't try to discern this or discern that. If you had probable cause to arrest them, you arrested. They say you weren't going to jail, then you used force and you took them to jail. Right. So as it stands now, the academies are spending a tremendous amount of time now on items that are at the front burner of society. And although they don't spend a lot of time with the verbiage of men being assaulted, they spend a lot of time talking about the elements of assault, the elements of domestic abuse. They know that you don't have to hit somebody. They know that there are psychological aspects to these criminal charges because it's written into the actual state charges. Most states do a good job of giving law enforcement and when I say law enforcement, you have to remember I'm talking about not just the police, but I'm talking about the prosecutors also because they're part of it. They go through a lot of time talking about the non-mechanical things associated with criminal activity. Because when I started, when you're interrogating people and you're trying to get the motive and everything else, they never talked about some of the skill sets that you have to understand why they did it. Because motive does actually become important when you figure out what's going on. And when it comes to domestic abuse, whether the victim is male or female, there's almost always an extended history. And the history starts off almost always the same. Verbal abuse first, and then it graduated up, and then before you know it, now you're getting hit and stabbed and shot and run over by cars and all that other silliness that goes on. So law enforcement I think they've done a good job of changing the way that they trained 40 years ago.
Right.
So to answer your question, although we don't have a lot of time on the scene to try to assess the amount of psychological damage is done, it's also not our job.
Right.
Because it has no bearing, that part has no bearing on whether I have probable cause to arrest somebody and send this case to the prosecutor.
Yeah, yeah.
unfortunately.
Yeah, no, thanks for making that distinction. I think that's the jobs of counselors and therapists to
Yeah.
help that. But we need police to help support us and back us up. You know,
Sure.
when there's a victim, we need that. But, thinking of a case that I had where it was a man and he couldn't leave his house for a lot of reasons. She was physically assaulting him to the point that it required hospitalization, but for reasons he couldn't leave the house, all we know. And I suggested to him that he go to his local police department and tell them what's happening, just to let them know, and maybe they can drive by the house. Or I think it's always important to let police know ahead of time what's in your house in case they
Sure.
get called. They know what they're coming to. So is that a good idea? That if there's a victim and for whatever reason can't leave or whatever, that they just contact the police, and will the police be receptive to that?
Not only they're receptive, but every police department has a file system in their that's called CAD, computer aided dispatching, and they have a file system where we can make additional notes. We may not actually generate a police report, but we can make notes like, hey, this guy's got a lot of guns. We can make notes. Hey, he was very unstable. He said that, the next time we come, he's going to, take a shot at us. So when that call for service comes in and it's associated through the database with that address, we get that additional information. So the answer to your question is that will always be a good sign for someone to say, hey, look, not right now, but this is going on. And then they can associate that data with that address.
Oh, good. So, men out there, if you can't get out of the house, please contact your local police. So if you get to the point where you need help, they're there, and they have ways to keep an eye on things.
Okay, so our next question, and you kind of touched on, you're going straight through the questions, which is great. Were you aware of a domestic violence policy model that addressed procedures, protocols, and processes for victims of domestic violence? And if so, was there any specific language dedicated to male victims?
No, it was not. There was no. You have to think about the close and well-regulated policies in law enforcement. There's not a lot of ambiguity, so they don't use him or her prefixes. They just say the person, and we recognize that men can be the victims. However, there is, to my knowledge, of all the time that I did law enforcement, there were a million shelters, there were a million resources, and not one single resource that I had ever seen in my career was directed towards men.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you could give the men that resource, but they were not directed towards men. And whether the men actually got help from those resources, I couldn't tell you because I never heard any feedback from anybody as to whether that specific resource serviced men. So I don't know of any. I've never seen them.
So I can speak on that a little bit, and you're absolutely correct. Resources for men are very limited. We had one of our guests that came on and said that, when he did go to one of the facilities, the paperwork was geared towards women. They asked, could you possibly be pregnant? So, even at some point, some things need to change, right?
Sure.
Things need to be more, I don't know. It needs to be separated, male versus female, because we know that the needs of a man are different from needs of a woman.
Right.
And right now, we just don't have those policies or procedures right now. So I'm going to ask you I'm going to ask you, and we'll be really quick because we have 2 minutes before we take a break. But what do you suggest? Where would we start with just trying to make changes to the way men are presented when there are domestic violence situations where they're the victims?
Well, I think the first portion of that is to try to advertise in a way that men, sometimes you got to go where they are and advertise to men, because if I was sitting in the barbershop and somebody brought in a flyer, I might look at it, but I'm not going to say anything about it.
Right.
But at least I looked at it. And I think if agencies were to make an outreach, the place where men frequent, and do some publicity in places, those jumbo screens at sporting events, they do it for gamblers. They should be able to do it for, men. And I think the common I guess where the bus gets missed on this is because everybody just associates domestic violence with
Women.
They don't recognize that it's also for men. I mean, that's typical of anything that picks a class. I taught a racial, a class for police officers to be able to charge people with hate crimes. And I had a white officer who said, that's just for black people. And I said, so let me get this straight. If your white son is on the bus and a black guy comes and says, I hate all white people, and slaps your son in the face, you just want to be charged with assault second degree. You don't want him to get the extra little pinch for the, he says, oh, really? I said, yeah, it's based on the fact that there's no other reason why he assaulted your son other than the fact that he was white. You wouldn't want that? He says, well, yeah, I guess I would. But now that's a police officer who had been a police officer for over 2 decades. When we don't know something, it leaves a vacuum where a whole bunch of silliness can occupy. So to answer your question, there has to be more awareness, and the awareness has to be in ways that men are always looking at things. It has to be aware. I mean, it has to be made. That's the first step, has to be made. Then after that, I think you have to get with cities and jurisdictions to see what policies they have specifically related to that issue, and let them know that there are actually resources out there, and get your resource added onto the list, because the police departments have lists and lists of resources, from everything from that to people who will come pick up a dead deer body. We got a list and list and list. So I think that's how you solve that problem.
Good.
Okay. Well, Keith, we're going to take a quick break, and then we'll be right back with the Men's 911 show.
All right.
If you're looking for a new informative health and lifestyle show to gain knowledge and inspiration to help guide your journey to think, work, and live more powerfully, then you need to listen to Sage Advice with Melissa. Now, whether you're trying to improve your life from a mental, physical, or spiritual journey, Sage Advice with Melissa Coleman, CEO of Sage Skincare, delivers weekly advice from industry experts to provide you with insightful suggestions to allow you to thrive with a better quality of life. Melissa's mission? To guide you through the uncharted waters of health and wellness, and to give you a voice to help improve your life. So be sure to tune in to Melissa on KWRH 92.9 FM every Thursday at 10 a.m. You'll be glad you did.
Hey, listeners, saying thanks to your customers is nice and polite, but expressing your gratitude in memorable and ongoing ways can boost your business. At Promo Experts LLC, we exceed our customers' expectations. For over 20 years, our product knowledge and experience has helped them with their marketing initiatives and trade show graphics. We are happy to put that experience to work for you. Quality products, great customer service, and prices are our number one priority. We work with you to find unique, creative, and new ideas that fit your image and expectations, helping you build strong relationships with your customers. When you select Promo Experts as your marketing partner, we help you to see more than the big picture. For more information about this exciting opportunity, contact Diane Carson, President, at 636-458-5241. That's 636-458-5241. Let Promo Experts help you to move your business brand beyond the bland. Have you always wanted to write your own book but don't know where to start? Publishing Concepts, a publishing company located right here in St. Louis, offers everything from consulting, book printing, copyrights, ISBNs and barcodes, print book layout, ebook and iBook layout, graphic design, cover design, ghostwriting, typing and editing, distribution, marketing, and more for an affordable price. Visit publishingconceptsllc.com or just Google Publishing Concepts to get started today, or call 314-781-8880. That's 314-781-8880. Publishing Concepts. We help you sell more books.
Many small businesses do not have a marketing manager. In many cases, it is the company owner that drives marketing and sales efforts with the gut instinct to survive. Even when small businesses do have a marketing manager, though, many of them are trying to navigate through the complex sales and marketing landscape with little to no success or budget.
How to Promote Your Business with Limited Money is a general purpose, how-to-business book written for business owners and marketing professionals by business owners Dr. Stan Fine and Joseph W. Clote. This guide is not intended to be read as a front-to-back chapter book and rather serves as a quick reference guide. Refer to this book as you need specific information and skip around as needed.
Promoting your business with limited money is one challenging feat, but there are unlimited ideas you can apply to achieve objectives you pre-establish. So put on your marketing hat and let's take action to start showing your prospects the value your business delivers.
A little you need to know about Dr. Stan Fine. During his 60-year career, Dr. Fine has become an authority on sales and marketing business development issues. His presentations have made him much in demand as a speaker and seminar leader. He has taught business development topics at numerous universities across the United States and has conducted over 500 sales and management seminars. Some of Dr. Fine's credentials in corporate America are currently Dr. Fine serves as a co-host of the You of Business radio show on KROH 92.9 FM in St. Louis and a co-host of Nationwide Daily Radio Show on my Genre Radio Network on the Xeno Media platform. In 100 cities, he is also on a daily TV show on the Valuable TV and the Real TV networks. Go and get a copy of How to Promote Your Business with Limited Money today.
To purchase your copy of How to Promote Your Business with Limited Money, go to It's Your Business website at www.itsyourbusinessradio.com.
Well, audience, this is a reminder that you're listening to the Men's 911 Show, coming to you on Wednesdays at 3 p.m. on KWRH 92.9 FM and KXOK 102.9 FM, simulcasting on the My Genre Radio Network, Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. and 4 p.m. Go to the usradionetwork.com. And today we are back with our guest, retired police officer Keith Emerson.
Thank you.
Welcome back, Keith. Welcome back, audience. We are speaking with Keith, who is a retired police officer, about domestic violence and just what he's seen while he was an officer and what changes can be made. So we're going to continue on with the questions that we have for Keith. And so my next question for you is, some of our male targets of abuse have stated that even though they have protection orders on female abusers, they are often not arrested and continue to violate the protection orders. Can you address why the standards are not the same for women as they are for men?
I can't explain that. I cannot. It's not supposed to happen. That's just a fact of the matter. But I can tell you that the way that police officers are trained is that there is no favoritism one way or the other. The state of Missouri gives us discretionary powers, but there are some things that you just don't use discretionary powers on. And ex parte orders are pretty straightforward. The judge makes it plain and simple on what's to happen if people violate those. But the second part of that is proof of the violation. Mm-hmm. There has to be some proof that has been violated. And some of the proof could include a video of the person on the ex parte driving past, a video of the person showing up. The best way to enforce an ex parte order is to have documentation of what's going on. Physical evidence is absolutely fantastic for police, but is also spectacular for prosecution. And the prosecutors, when they issue cases for violation of ex parte order, they just don't want a hearsay type of deal. They actually want physical evidence, because ultimately prosecutors' job are to successfully prosecute criminals. Mm-hmm. And if they don't have the information necessary, the police don't provide them with the information necessary to get a successful prosecution, those things are kind of pushed off to the side. So if I were to give anybody that had an ex parte against another person, I tell them physical evidence is the rule for the day. You know, because these things are violated, it doesn't matter, I guess, what the gender is. What matters is that you have some type of proof. And when those cases are straightforward, where, like I said, kids are super spectacular. I hate to say it, because they're going through they're systematically going through a tremendous amount of stress in the first place. But the fact of the matter is, kids don't be quiet. You know, they talk and they talk. And when they say, yeah, and she did this and she did that, you really need to take action on that. So if you were to ask me what to do to prevent people or law enforcement from not taking things seriously, I would just say, Just make sure that you have the best information and evidence available so that they can't ignore it.
Okay.
How do you, do you have any opinions on how a victim can find a good lawyer, or what are some things to look for, or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, you know what? I gotta say, defense attorneys are they're of no value to me until I get in trouble. I know some really good defense attorneys for DWIs and things like that, and I know some defense attorneys that are really good men and women, just good men and women. But I don't know anybody that would specialize in something of that nature. I have no idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know. Okay.
Good question, though.
Right. So if there's any good lawyers out there, let us know. We'll spread your name around.
Absolutely. So our next question is, I think there is a misconception that female abusers are not as violent as male abusers. And we know that's just not true, right?
That's ridiculous.
We've had a guy that came in that she punched him so hard in his eye.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Blinded
him. He had to have surgery. Some smashed his fingers in the door, would letting him sleep at night. Just so those type of things, which, not letting somebody sleep at night, we wouldn't consider that to be a crime,
Right.
So these are some of the tactics that women use.
Yeah, that's
That you can't say, oh, well, she wouldn't let me sleep at night.
Right.
It's an assault, so
yeah, but it's a form of harassment.
it is.
It really is. I mean, that fourth degree domestic assault really wrapped things up pretty tight and put a bow on it. And what I think is it's easier to manufacture the evidence that's necessary for these cases than people make it seem. They make it seem like it's hard. And I got to tell you, the very first, in 35 years, I may have been assaulted maybe 2 times, and the very first one was a woman, right in the middle of Lee May Ferry and Lindbergh, DWI, like 11 o'clock in the morning, and misjudged her, went to handcuff her, and put one cuff on. She turned around and slapped me right in the face. And I just stood there for a second and said, wow, that was awesome. and then, of course, I used the amount of force necessary to take her into custody. But, women can assault you. They can hurt you, So that comes from, the old saying, you hit like a girl. I know some girls hit really, really hard, so if you think that, that they can't physically injure men, that's not true. And then think about that. A lot of times they use something to equalize the fact that they're smaller. They use, weapons, and a dangerous instrument by state statute is anything that could cause serious physical injury. So, a skillet is a dangerous instrument, and it moves the domestic assault to a higher level. So don't think that women can't hurt you, because women sometimes use weapons, so that's not true. So if you believe it, that's on you.
Right. They also do a lot of bruising, scratching, pinching, and that's thing. So if you have a man thinking, well, she's scrunching, pinching, scratching, it's in combination with other things usually, which builds the story. But just imagine a man saying, well, she scratches me or she pinches me. And it just does, it's just so emasculating for them to put that together. We really need to see the whole story when we think about how men are abused.
I agree.
Yeah. And I think sometimes the intimidation, pointing, in a man's face, I think because most times men react, right?
Yeah.
When you pointing or you have your fingernail in his. So just those things that I think we don't really look at as crimes or that they're harmful. If you've had a man who's been at work all day and he comes home to a finger being pointed in his face,
right,
there's a chance that, it's going to escalate. And I think, these are some of the things that women do that we don't necessarily look at as being harmful.
Right.
So our next question is, let's see, what is our next question? Oh.
Community resources.
We do. We really do need to look at resources, but there aren't any.
Right.
There are no resources.
Yeah, we talked about that. If you can recall any community resources for men, and and I've said this before, that the people understand that domestic violence policy and theory all started out of feminist theory back in the 1970s. So it was created for women, and that narrative that men are perpetrators and women are victims. So that's what's been the narrative for the last 50 years. There hasn't been anything new. So anything created under domestic violence has been for women. We have to change that. We need to start, getting researchers to research violent women and men who are victims. What do they need? There's only 2 safe houses in all of the United States. I don't know if you know that. The one in Arkansas, it's called the Taylor House. And there's the Family Place in Austin, Texas. Two out of the whole United States. And those were specifically designed for the needs of men. And here's the other thing. The domestic violence, I don't know when the law was, that domestic violence operators or providers had to provide services to men. But that really came out of the gay and lesbian movement. They wanted some equal services for that.
I can see that.
So the federal government said, okay, now you have to start. It's gender non-specific. And so then domestic violence shelters, okay, well, we're helping men, but they really didn't change anything. They just said, okay, we're going to help men because they want that federal money,
Right.
which is fine. But we're saying we need providers, services, people that are really going to look at the needs of men when it comes to domestic violence.
Yeah, I think what is probably one of the biggest hurdles to making this problem more effective is just the sheer numbers. If you look at the numbers of women who, you go through the news and see women who have been killed or seriously injured, and the news media, and I'm not mad at the news media because they're after ratings. Once you realize that they're after ratings, and you don't get so upset with them, but they have a way of attracting the things that sensationalize what's going on. So the sheer number of women versus sheer number of men, total 100% of the women versus 100% of the men, the number is so different. I believe that aids in allowing that to be almost swept under the rug. In any society where you have something that's not equal, the part that's got the greater magnitude is focused on substantially more than the one that does not. I think in this particular case, men don't make it easy on themselves. It's almost like back in the 80s and 90s when the greater preponderance of women who were sexually assaulted and raped didn't report them. And it's based on the entire way that the investigation went to the court trial. The investigation used to be cold and callous. It used to, they get to court and the defense could mount all things, about their past and everything else. And it wasn't until the legislature and the executive branches started making sure that these things didn't happen. I can tell you back when I started a rape investigation, you took her to the hospital and you sat in the waiting room with everybody else, and people were, why is he sitting there with that woman? And if she had any injuries, they don't know what's going on, but it was absolutely destructive to the woman. Mm-hmm. So you got to do that 1-2 times in this neighborhood, and everybody in that whole neighborhood knows, don't call the police, deal with it yourself and just take it under the chin. Well, when law enforcement started making the changes to educate police officers, and they started making policy changes, and the hospital started making policy changes that they wouldn't go into the normal waiting room sitting next to a police, they made those changes. And when they made those changes, that was easier to document, and it was easier to prosecute, and the prosecutors were more successful in the prosecution. I think this is sort of kind of similar to that. And I think if we do some of the things that we did back in the 80s when I first got in, because I saw that metamorphosis, I saw it change. If we did some of the things similar to what we did with women in sexual assaults and rapes, I think that this could maybe be balanced a little bit better than it is now, because it's not balanced well now. But I think if we because we've already done that before, we don't have to reinvent that wheel. It's already been done. So I believe that if we start to do things like that, we will start to see that men will be more able to psychologically and mentally report that they're being assaulted, and because there will be an established comfort level. And I think with the backside where you're providing safe houses and things of that nature, I think once that comes to fruition at a larger scale, and like you think I'm joking, I think on the magnetron, wherever it is, they ought to say, something about being abused, blah, blah, blah. And here's a number, because it's got to get out there.
Right.
And people have to know that it actually exists, because I would think that right now men are like women felt back then. If I say something, nothing's going to come of it, and men don't understand that there are actually criminal violations and they can actually be prosecuted. So I don't know. I think the stigma associated with being a big tough man, and that is kind of part of the problem. But I think that there are steps that we could take administratively and policy wise that could change that.
Yeah. Oh, I definitely agree. We had an attorney on here, and he said, part of the problem is we're not asking the right questions to men, because the questions we asked were designed for women. So we need to find out what questions we need to ask men. When you're in that emergency room, when you go to your primary care doctor, we assess all, when you go to your doctors, they assess you for domestic violence. Well, there has to be a different question for men that makes it easy for him to answer yes than do you feel safe at home? Because men, it goes against their nature to say, I don't feel safe in my home, because they're providers and they're protectors. So we need to be aware of that we are not asking the right questions to get to the answer when it comes to men. We need to really start there. And we have to start there to really understand the needs of men, understand how they're victimized.
I agree wholeheartedly.
We also need the support of men. I think
yes.
That's one of the biggest hurdles that we have to overcome, is that, men, they congratulate us all the time for speaking out about this, but are they willing to come on board and do the work? That has been an issue for us.
I can imagine.
Even trying to get men to support other men who have experienced this, or even coming out to tell their story. They don't, necessarily want to be seen. They don't want to talk about it. So how do you even get men to start talking about this?
The problem is also the solution. The problem is we're men.
Right.
The solution is we're men. It's the way you were raised. It's the way that all your peers behave and interact with each other. I can't imagine being a super neat conversation. And next time I get to hear all my buddies, if one of them says, "Hey man, my wife tagging me in the middle of the night, man, she's jacking me up." I mean, it's like, oh my, I don't know how that would go over.
Yeah.
However, it would be a whole lot easier if we knew that there were resources, because I was just at the game and I saw this big thing on the screen said, call, 1-800, please stop beating me, whatever the thing is. I think that would change things a little bit more, but I just don't think that men are going to have those conversations unprovoked.
Right. And that's the whole goal of our program here, is just to educate people, make it okay to talk about it and start talking about this, how things have been silenced for too long.
I agree.
Well, they need to know what to say when the situation happens, especially if the police are called to their residence by a third party or called by one of the people in the house. They need to know what things to say to police officers to lessen the chance of them being arrested if they're not the person who was a primary aggressor. Instead of being silent and letting things be said against them, they need to know that they really need to plead their case, because, think about the complexity of life after you get arrested unjustly for domestic abuse. You can no longer possess or purchase a firearm. That's just done. There's certain things that you can't do. If you have children, it does affect your custody arrangements and your parenting plan when the court generates that parenting plan. It really does affect it. And if you have an ex parte order and you have guns, you have to surrender those. I mean, there are a lot of other things that occur when you get charged with domestic assault. And if you did it, you need to go to penitentiary. I'm all for it. You shouldn't be hitting women. If you did it and all the evidence leads that way, you need to go. But if you didn't do it, you need to start pleading your case at the onset of interaction with law enforcement. Instead of being a passenger in a car, you need to be the driver when the police show up. You need to plead your case, because I can tell you in cases where I've been there, this is one of those crimes in the state of Missouri where they don't even ask the victim to sign an official complaint. The state has recognized that there would be a little bit of hesitation because of the reasons I mentioned before, finances, childcare, vehicles, all that stuff. Those things can automatically go away. So a victim might want to sign a no prosecution form, or they might not want to sign for departments that the victim has to sign an official complaint. They might not want to sign that. Well, that's okay, because the state of Missouri has already recognized that that puts you in a bad position. So the state of Missouri is going to take this prosecution and pick it up and make sure it goes to fruition. There are some cities where even after the prosecution has started, if people want to try to sign a no prosecution form, they can't do it. The cities won't allow them to do it. So I think if men know everything that there is available that they can actually lose if they're falsely charged, I think they would take a little bit more time to make sure they're not falsely charged. I mean, that doesn't mean that you gotta, be the worst person in the room, but it does mean that you should do something very fundamental, is take up for yourself. And I think that that's probably the bigger problem, is because sometimes when law enforcement arrives on the scene, they don't do a great investigation. I wish every police officer was a perfect police officer. I wish that were the case, but the fact of the matter is, not so much. So if you don't know whether you're going to get a good police officer when you call the police, or you're going to get a bad one, you don't know which one you're going to get. So you should probably err on the side of taking up for yourself and not be so concerned about what's going to happen to her, and be a little bit more concerned about what's going to happen to you, and establish a dialogue with those initial officers to, let them know, hey, look, I don't want this to go any further. However, I don't want her hitting me anymore. And that's why I called you, or that's why the neighbors called, they heard it. And I just don't want her hitting me anymore. And get that information in there so you don't wind up in custody saying it at the station. You should probably say it at the on-site of interaction with law enforcement.
Wow. So I'm wondering, as I'm listening to you talk about this, because this is all about education and knowledge, right?
Sure.
So there should be some type of class taught just for men, and I think you were already teaching some Constitution classes and Missouri statutory law classes. Is this something that could be taught in those classes as it relates to men?
Well, yeah, because they're already teaching an abundance of other stuff. I think the academy is up to like 960 hours now. When I went through, it's like 640. There's a tremendous amount of information that they are teaching, and they're always looking for new real-time information to train recruits, because most people don't realize this, but the academy is the first and probably the last time that they will be immersed in a training environment. Most departments don't have the money to send their officers to on-service training, in-service training. And because the state post police officer standard training, because they require that you get X amount of hours, everybody else calls it continuing ed. They require that, that's not always side things. That's more core things, racial profiling, use of force. So if they were to get that information in the academy, it would become more normal part of their training. Then in-service training, it would probably also bleed into that, because that's what we find out in law enforcement. The things that are big at the academy, a lot of the officers who have been on the road for X amount of years didn't even get that. So they incorporate that into in-service training. So I think when they talk about domestic, because in Missouri statutory law, when I taught that, we have each chapter, and we spent a tremendous amount of time on the domestic abuse charges and show the differences and similarities to regular assaults. So we had regular assault, and then we had domestic assault. We had to go through both and then show what's different, because there are some differences between regular assault and domestic assault. So we had to go through all those differences. There's nothing to say that you can't put in that actual post curriculum something that refers to male victims, because male victims they have a completely different set of dynamics than female victims have.
Absolutely.
And although the number of female victims is much higher than male victims,
because men don't report.
Yeah, and part of it's just like the rape example I told you before, because people aren't reporting. So the end result is, to answer your question, it could be included in training, but it should also be up on the magnetron. Call this number, get some training, because citizens don't go to the police academy.
Right.
And a lot of times, if you're a citizen and you know something, I can tell you there are times when I go on a scene and an officer would be making a judgment, and the person would know more about the actual law than the officer was, and they'd be quoting, "Hey man, this not true, it's so and so," and the officer, "That's not true," and I'm like, "Yeah, it is true."
Right.
What he's saying is true. So a lot of times, if you can articulate what the actual facts are as a civilian, it gives law enforcement a second chance to say, "Yeah, he might be right." And if you can create just a pause, maybe you can stop something terrible from happening.
Absolutely.
Also, I wanted to, when you talked about making a judgment, Ann Silvers, who wrote the book of Abused Men, she wrote the really book on this. She was saying that oftentimes you can come up to a scene where the man is angry and the woman's crying, and she calls it super crying. Women, we cry for everything. When we're happy, we're sad, we're glad, right? And men, they're either happy or they're angry. So people shouldn't make an assumption when they walk upon or see something, a crying woman and an angry man, that automatically he's perpetrator. Just want to clear that up. I think that's the common assumption that happens, and it's just not the case.
But assumptions they evaporate really fast when you do a preliminary investigation. Assumptions are of no value. The only assumption I have is that there's a possibility they may try to harm me. That's the only assumption I go to a scene with, is I want to make sure that I don't get hurt on this situation, and I'm going to take control of this. But once you initiate your preliminary investigation, you start getting the facts of what happened. A lot of times that other stuff evaporates, but you got to take the time to do that initial investigation. You have to do the preliminary investigation. If you don't, you can't establish probable cause to arrest anybody.
Right.
Okay, Keith, as we wrap up the show, I would like to give you an opportunity to just give some final thoughts, opinions, suggestions, recommendations.
I just think the magnetron thing is the best suggestion. A billboard or two. Because none of this will come to fruition if it doesn't get started in a way that men retrieve information. We retrieve information through visual stimuli, and that's what we do. We're driving down the highway, we're looking at TV, we're on the internet, looking through, YouTube videos or whatever. We're looking through Facebook Reels or whatever it's called, and that's how we see things. And I think if you go to a place where men see things and you make them aware of it, that's going to be your best tool to try to initiate some type of change. I won't call it reform, because reform means the system is broken. I don't think the system exists.
Right.
So
Good point.
the system has to be initiated, and it has to be designed. And in order to design to be successful, you have to go where they are. If I went to a barbershop and gave them 50 flyers, they'd probably look at me and kind of chuckle. Well, if I went to my barbershop, I'd be like, "Hey, thanks, Keith," because they know they better not laugh at me. But the fact of the matter is, if I went to a different barbershop, you're like, what is this guy doing? But at least they see it.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I think that that's kind of a big deal, is to actually see it so that they can formulate a strategy for it. If my friend is in this situation, instead of just saying, "Man, that's terrible, I hope it works out for you," I can say, "Hey, here's a flyer," or "Hey, I saw that on the billboard," or something like that. So that's my only suggestion. I don't think that law enforcement is gonna change anytime soon. I think that you're gonna have police officers who make bad decisions, because we have them. You got bad plumbers. Why wouldn't you think we have bad police?
Right.
And so they're gonna do those things, but you can maybe mitigate some of that ridiculousness by being thoughtful when you interact with them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's really the best thing. I've seen officers who were making bad decisions, like I said before, start making better decisions when the actual civilian starts asking them questions.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Well, audience, thank you so much. It's that time again, audience, when we wrap up this week's show. As a reminder, our goal is to not only help male victims, but also men find a path to save their lives and restore their identities as leaders, providers, and protectors in their families and communities. We want to thank our guest Officer Keith Emerson, for being on the show. And a reminder that we will join you again next Wednesday at 3 p.m. here on KWRH 92.9 FM and KXOK 102.9 FM, nationwide on My Genre Radio Network, Monday to Friday, 9 at 4 p.m. Stay safe and have a blessed week. And thank you, Keith Emerson.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. See you next week.
All right.
Secretary says she's ready to provide more government backing to prop up smaller banks in order to support the banking system. And Taiwan's President Tsai Ing-wen will make 2 stops in the United States later this month, when she visits both New York and Los Angeles. There's more from us on Twitter at Feature Story. That's Feature Story News. Nick Harper reporting.
Funding for world and national news has been made possible through generous donations from listeners like you. KXOK LP St. Louis Community Radio. Listen to us on the air at 102.